This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, hello. It is our third session on reflecting and learning. Today is about reflecting and learning from evaluation findings. It's our third session in a series of three. My name's Jen Riley. I think I know most of you. You say hello on the with some familiar names there. Does everyone want to say hi in the chat function? See, Emily's already off, and Christine said hi. Hola, Caroline Davis, hello. So I do mute you all just because it gets very, very loud on these calls, these live webinars. So I have muted you, but I will do some call outs during the session so that you can hear somebody else's voice other than mine, as much fun as it is for an hour. Anybody else want to say good day? I can see there's 10 of you out there, so there's a few more people, and the reason I'm getting you to say hi is because we need to use this chat function through the session. So please type in the chat function hello or hola or hi or good day or whatever your preference is. What about Andrea and Stacey and Andy and Marianne? Here we go. A few more comments. Wonderful, wonderful, great. Got everyone talking. That's wonderful. Okay, so yes, it's midday. We've got an hour, a lunchtime session. So just quickly, bit of an overview of the sessions. So in session one we talked about how we measure outcomes. We talked about what outcomes are versus outputs. We looked at selecting indicators and targets to measure outcomes. We looked at some data collection methods. And then last week, we sort of moved more into, well, how do we evaluate outcomes? Because it's all well and wonderful to measure them, but we actually need to make some sort of judgment. Can other people, I've just had Megan saying, I have no audio, is that just me? And now I'm a bit worried, I've just been talking. Can someone let me know if they can hear me? Okay, cool. Thanks, Andy. Don't know what's happening there, Megan. Yeah, I'll let you troubleshoot there. Thank you, Stacey. Great. So, well, it's all good to measure, but we need to evaluate. We need to make a judgment. We need to make an assessment of whether or not we are achieving our outcomes. So, there's a lot of talk about impact measurement, outcome measurement. I would encourage you to sort of constantly sort of think about, well, it's about measurement and evaluation. M and E. We often talk about monitoring evaluation, but you can talk about measurement and evaluation. So we talked a lot about how do you use evaluation questions to frame outcomes measurement, and talked a lot more about sort of the analysis of data, the synthesis of data, and we went through a matrix to sort of help you sort of track questions through to data collection methods and approaches. And we talked about reporting outcomes as well, using dashboards and reports and so on. So that brings us to today. And today we are here to talk about really the now what. You've got your evaluation, you've done your report, but importantly what we do next, because the other big issue is that we're not using if we do get as far as evaluating outcomes, there is a real and this is statistically in our sector and globally, we don't use our evaluative findings, and that is so important that we can use our findings to improve our work. So that's the focus of today is, well, how do you reflect and apply learnings through workshops and feedback loops and sprints. So this is really closing the loop on, you've set up your design, you've measured your outcomes, you've made some evaluation, but how do we take that forward? So I have a question, or quick summary of objectives, understand the role of evaluative thinking, and we'll talk about some participatory methods. So my question to you, in a word or two, why bother? Again, I've talked about measurement. Why do evaluation? What's the point? So I've talked a little bit about that already. So in the chat log, I'll ask you to have a go at that question. Is it all worthwhile? Exactly. Is all the work that we do worthwhile, Marianne? To improve, to learn, to refine. Yeah, all of those reasons. Yeah. So it's really important that we measure, but then we go ahead and do the sort of next level of reflection on that. Identify what we didn't know before. I work out where things are working and where they're not, what we could do to improve, or if something's working for some cohort and not another cohort. So in terms of, we've got some criteria here. We talk a lot about the purpose primarily of evaluation being program improvement, and this is where your focus has been in your answers today, is accountability is what drove the sector of evaluation. It came sort of out of the sort of 80s and 90s, especially when we were looking at corruption in overseas, and is our aid money being spent well? Is our program work? Is it actually making a difference? And as the result of that, there was a huge accountability push for us to evaluate. But I think since then we've realised that there's a whole world of gain from evaluating, and that's to improve our work. And accountability, so sort of being accountable for the money and doing what we said we'd do, it becomes more of a secondary or more of a it's as important, but it will fall out if you do your program improvement, if you do your reporting, then you should be able to pass on that information, and it will tick the box in terms of those outcomes. So we're going to talk about it through that lens of program improvement. Now, quite like this is that once you start working with your evaluation data, once we start working with these key findings, you can't unknow it. So I think bringing people into a forum where they can reflect on it in a way that enables them to learn, because sometimes they can be quite confronting, especially if things aren't working the way we want them to work. We need to be able to hold people through that process, and your role, as evaluators, is to facilitate learning and facilitate reflection, so they really understand and learn, and the focus is more on that than performance and accountability, which can shut down conversations. So measurement or monitoring and evaluation is a real core part of a program cycle. I think this won't be anything new to you around, you plan it, you do it, you monitor and evaluate, you communicate results to stakeholders. But this step here, reflecting on the results of our work, sometimes, we go straight back into the plan, or we just do what we've always done, which is even more terrifying. But this process of reflection and decision making about what needs to be done differently are really, really important, so that we don't keep doing what we've always done and expecting different results, which I think someone said was the definition of madness. So I think, this could be a useful slide for you to sort of, reflect on and use. Another way that we can frame it is, you design your framework, you implement your framework, you report, and of course you're doing this all the way through. You're constantly reflecting and learning. But I think this diagram, it can be a useful one to show. But I think some of the issues with monitoring or measurement and evaluation is that things start to fall down, and they start to fall down at the beginning, and they get worse as you go through the process. And I think that there might be some heads nodding, I hope, out there, that we've all been involved where we've designed a framework, an outcomes measurement or a monitoring evaluation framework, and it's too complex. They can be high quality, but they're too complex for your organisation, and they just get overwhelmed, and people don't implement. At the implementation level, we found, this was a study that one of our workers did in Timor-Leste, and he found that the implementation of monitoring evaluation was good, but ad hoc and complex environment, and that there was room for improvement. And I think we could probably all relate to that as well, that, we may do bits and pieces of it, but, there's certainly sort of room for improvement. And when we come through to reporting, he found that sometimes there was a gap, and I think we know this as well, and we've either been recipients of these reports, but it doesn't quite hit the mark in terms of what we were expecting, and the information needs to make further decisions. So making sure that those reports are fit for that purpose of making further decisions or improving insights for design. So these are the sorts of things that was found in this particular case study, but I think they're generalized across all of our work. So there's sort of areas there. But I think finally the learning piece, which is why we now talk about MEL rather than just monitoring evaluation. We talk about monitor, evaluation, and learn, is that there is limited evidence existing that demonstrates that the findings and learnings are informing management decision. So that loop about that gold dust that we get through evaluation, where we find out something really useful, often isn't then put into the design process, and we don't adapt our work. So this session is to sort of help you close that loop and sort of make sure that your outcomes measurement is useful and used. So those two things are really, really important. So I hope that's a useful diagram. Anyone want to reflect on that? Is that something that's sort of useful or ringing a bell, or you're nodding your head, or or anything else you want to sort of add to that? Everyone's probably having a think. Anyone want to make a comment? Oh, I've been really shy. Hopefully it was useful. As I said, it was a stock take that was done across a number of monitoring and evaluation projects that had happened. Yeah, Marianne, that's a really great comment. Marianne said, yes, familiar, and disappointing to service teams who participate. Absolutely. And I think, I hear that a lot. There's a lot of evaluation fatigue out there, or survey fatigue. And it's because you frontliners who are working really hard, you collect all this data and it goes into a big black hole and you never see it again. And you don't know how it's being used, if it's useful, is it actually changing anything? And that's really disempowering. So I think, yeah, we definitely need to be better custodians of data and be accountable to our people that we're working with to make sure that if we collect data, it is being used and it is informing work. Because if it isn't, then yeah, stop collecting. Okay. So I think in terms of program improvement, I think it's important to ensure that the program teams, collect it, analyze it, and use it, and create a learning organisation that is open to receiving this feedback loop and getting that information back. But one of as I said, one of the biggest failings is that the findings are underused. So even if you get as far as evaluating, they're not getting used. And then people say, well, that's an expensive exercise, why bother? And so these are a couple of questions that you can potentially ask yourself about why these findings are not being used. And is it because the measuring systems or the monitoring systems, as we call them in international aid, or did they not target the right areas? Were the findings presented in a non-user-friendly way? And the other thing is, especially in these days, has the stakeholder requirements changed over the life of the program? Often what people wanted to know at the start changes over time, or the policy direction's changed, or there's a whole heap of things that could have changed. So checking back in with your stakeholders as you're doing it is really, really important. So there's a couple of questions there to reflect on, why things aren't being used. So we're going to give you a bit of a framework now, a framework for evaluative thinking and reflective practice to make sure that we close this loop. And it's a very simple one. And this will help, I think, in terms of making sure you get leadership buy-in as well as staff buy-in and client buy-in. Is that if you use a practice of the what, so what, now what model, that you collect data about what happened, and then you do the interpretation and judgment, the so what. So look at the merit and worth of what you've achieved, and then the final step in this is to sort of say, well, what are we going to do about it? So what now? And I think that's a really helpful way of sort of making people think. And if you're constantly thinking in this way, this might be useful. Many of you do this. I mean, this is sort of quite inherent in the way that we all work. So I'm curious, who has used this this approach? Sorry, I seem to have lost my slide today. Who has used this approach? Who has seen or used the what, so what, now what, or however people say it, framework before? Anyone used an example, or anyone want to share an example? Or you might have a slightly different way of calling it. Plan, do, study, act is another example. The sort of action research cycle. Anyone used anything sort of similar where you've had that sort of approach? Yeah, that Andy said, yeah, thinking of the action cycle, absolutely. People use the adaptive cycle, that's talked about as well. Let me go back one slide. Back to here. Yep, that's Christine. I mean, really, it's the process of doing, collecting, reflecting. We're using what happened, so what did that mean, what now? And the action research, there are different ways to do that, but the plan, do, study, and the study is the so what, and then there is an act, which is to make a decision. Yeah, so World Vision. I mean, I started my career in Oxfam, so I come out of the international sector as well. But often we do the cycles maybe at a client level, where you might sort of go, well, you take them through a process of, well, what happened and what did that mean and what are you going to do about it? But are we doing that at an organisational or sort of program or a service level? Okay. So one of the things that we use to sort of bring about this, well, what now, is to hold a reflection workshop. So pick a point in the year. We generally do them annually, but you can do them shorter. We're actually doing short cycles with a program, and I'm going to talk about that later, where every 4 months we come back and have a reflection or a plan, do, study, act cycle workshop. So I'm going to talk you through the elements of this reflection workshop that would be useful to do with your service. And so we use this framework. So this is the framework of the workshop. We talk about the data that came in, the questions, and then we talk about well what happens now. So it's a structured process, and you can use this with your teams. So the first thing about what happened. So what we do before we make that judgment, and I think Andy raised this just before, was to make sure that you've got some evidence base about what happened. And that's why you did all your data collection, you collected all your outcome data, you did your surveys, you did your focus groups, you did your participatory mapping, whatever you used. You make sure that you've got, you did that process right, so it's a solid evidence base. And then you present that in a results table, or the evidence matrix that we went through in the last session. Remember that matrix that we had, that by evaluation question? We did a summary of the results at a high level. So this, I don't want you to look at the detail. It's more the structure of this, because this what I'm showing you here is what we use in these workshops. So we fill out these parts separately. So the first thing we've got is an evaluation question down the side. Then we've got sort of key messages, and then we've got evidence. We have the strength of the evidence, and we have the recommendation. So by the end of the day, you can work through, you'll fill out this whole document together. The first step would be for you to put your evaluation questions down the left-hand side, and then to put in the data like we did in the last session, where we put in some high-level evidence, some high-level, so this is your synthesis, this is just your high-level results. With very little analysis at this stage, because you're giving it back to the group, your team, or team plus clients ideally, and then saying, this is the what, this is what we found out. And the next piece is to then reflect on, to make some judgments on that data. So then, so what? The next step in this, as I just said, was making a judgment. And the way that we do this is we get the participants to interrogate the outcomes data or the evidence and develop and review key messages for their report. Those key messages are a reflection and interpretation of the data. And the findings are then prioritised based on the key messages. What's important about this is it's not about you squirreled away in an office making these judgments separate to your team and your clients. Doing it with them means that they are telling you what's important, what are the key messages in the data according to what they value. And the evaluation is the process of valuing. So it's important that it's done in a participatory way. So once you've had a go at, you've had this conversation, they've reviewed all this data, you then fill out these key messages. This is what people's reflections on the data is. So here we've got some information here about a child mother nutrition and breastfeeding program, and so there's some data there. And then we've got the content is not important for this process, but it's just that you've had the evidence, and now you're putting in those key messages. So the final step here is what now? And so this template, we keep filling out this template. And in this process, it really is about getting your participants to make some decisions. So they identify and discuss the key lessons and recommendations, and getting them to identify them, but then prioritize which ones go up, because often there's many, and so that and getting them to sort of make them quite practical and not overly aspirational. So that this can take a lot of sort of facilitation, sort of butcher's paper and so on. But basically, what you get to is you're then filling out this last piece here of your worksheet. So this can be massive. This can be up on the table, up on the wall, and I'll show you how we've done this with magic walls on the wall. So what you'll end up with then is this results table that's complete, where you've got your evidence, you've gone through a process of working out the so what, which is the key messages, and then the what now, which is the recommendation. So here's an example of what we call a results table that we've done on a wall with these sticky walls. The there is a key evaluation question up the top. So this was the evidence. We've summarised the evidence here on bits of paper. Over on the right-hand side, we did our findings. So this was the key messages. This is what people, analysed from the evidence, from the results. And then you can see these little dots. So this is where people have highlighted what's really, really important out of the findings. And at the bottom, we've got the recommendations. So this took a full day to work through. Often we do it through a number of different evaluation questions. So you might have 3 or 4 evaluation questions or 3 or 4 stations that people are working at. But what's important is that people are sense-making and judging the evidence and then working out the what next. So the main output, as I just said, is this what we call finalized evidence matrix, and it has all those elements to it. And that is your key input to developing your progress reports and your next plans. I'll let you have a quick overview of that document, that slide. Is there any questions on this? Gone through it incredibly quickly. But the purpose of this was always as an exposure to some ideas that you can look further into. I'm going to share with you, do you remember this from the last session? This was the evaluation plan where we said we came up with a key evaluation question about young people successfully transition to earning or learning. We had the sub-questions and the indicators and the data source and the target. So to take that and put that into this format, we would do a summary of results with the supporting evidence. And that would input into that day. So that would be your results. The supporting evidence would be your results. And then they would go away and look at key messages and recommendations. So, given that, and what you've heard about what goes on in these reflection workshops, what would you think would be a criteria for a good one? How would you set this up? Because it is quite a challenge. What would be important to set up a good reflection workshop? And for example, it could be, provides a safe space to voice opinions. That's one example. Is there any other sort of thoughts about, if you've ever held one of these reflection workshops, how you would do that? What would be important for you to watch out as a facilitator? Notice I've got a comment in the chat box about implementation science and program fidelity. I'll come back to that in a moment because we're going to talk about continuous improvement methods. So having the right stakeholders and being aware of power dynamics, so true. Yeah, and holding a room so that someone's agenda does not, dominate this. Some of the things we've got there is providing a safe space for voicing opinions, and you can do things such as setting ground rules at the start of your session, putting them up on the wall, no wrong opinion, wet concrete, everyone's got a view, all of those sorts of ground rules. And I think the other thing that's important is that people's assumptions are surface, so you've got to really sort of challenge if people have an idea to bring that out. It provides an opportunity to thoughtfully use it, the evidence and finding. Another criteria for a good reflection workshop is that it provides an opportunity to learn from that previous. So what worked well, what didn't, in an honest way. And it really encourages action to improve. And I think having those forums and having people in the room and committing to those next steps really does help us ensure that the findings are used. So this is really, really important. Just put a few comments there in the chat box about what you said would be important for a workshop. I think that one Christine's raised about, potentially prefigure results with certain staff in case they're not good in one program. I think absolutely. I think it's not good to sort of drop surprises on people, and this is their workshop. So I think being able to sort of work through those and talk about them, some things, and so it can be brought into the room safely. People can be prepared for those conversations is really important. I think, yes, you've got to be absolutely clear about what is being evaluated. And I think that's where those plans, so getting sign off on your evaluation plans and saying we're going out to collect data on the knowledge and skills of parents on this particular, on, I don't know, SunSmart or something, and collecting data on SunSmart and bringing that back into the room. So being very clear about what is being evaluated. Yeah, absolutely, and not being scared about failure, and celebrating it, or at least sort of learning from it is so important, because otherwise we do continue to make the same mistakes, and it's our clients and our work that suffers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about shorter feedback loops, because we've talked about sort of the annual reflection process, but we are moving to sort of faster, as data becomes more quickly available and easier to access, we're moving into a world where people are expecting sort of real-time feedback thanks to sort of automation and digital technology. So some of the things that are important in integrating these feedback loops, and I think we talked about getting leaders on board. If you want to get the most out of these sessions, you've got the leadership has to come from above and below. I think it's important to have that plan, that you're all on the same page about what you are evaluating, what outcomes you are collecting data for. So across the organisation or across the collaboration, if you're working in a place-based or collective impact project. Involve your staff and clients as much as possible about building the tools to make sure we are measuring the right thing and are asking the right questions, so there is a solid evidence base that is valid, and we talked about that earlier. Having an annual reflection or a shorter, sort of every 4 months or whatever, but I think it's so important that there be this sort of mandate that there is a response to the recommendations, a commitment to implement, or certainly, that it will go on and inform plans. And if it doesn't, why not? You kind of want to know why not. Okay, so what do you think would be some of the questions you guys would use in a reflective session? Thinking about the what, so what now, what framework, what could be some of the things that you could ask to bring out and surface some of these assumptions about the findings, or another way to frame this is, many of you have probably done coaching. What are the sorts of questions you ask in coaching to help people come to realization of certain things? Here's one that might be useful. How good have our achievements been over the past months? What is our evidence for that? How good is good enough? And do you remember last time we used the matrix to understand what is, for breakfast in bed, what is okay breakfast in bed, what is good breakfast in bed, and what's exceptional breakfast in bed? So you could have that rubric ready to go, and then you could put to everyone, well, according to this, this is what good looks like. How's, we're saying it's good. What's our evidence for that? And then surfacing these challenges or issues that have been there, because it's pretty, it's difficult, this work. Why it'll give some context to why things have worked or not worked. Was it a design fail or was it an implementation fail? And that's really important, is that, it might have been a great program, but due to, a heat wave or due to a death in community or due to, other variables outside of your control, I think it's really important they get surfaced so that you're clear that, when you're evaluating, that you could say, well, we don't know if the program would work because too many things got in the way of implementation. Other questions to ask are, what insights have we had from other programs and other organisations? And what do we need to improve because of what we've learned? So these are some really big, broad, open questions that hopefully will bring about a really good, positive dialogue, a constructive dialogue when looking at the data and thinking about that. Well, what have we done? What does this mean? And now what do we do? So I was going to give you this example, and this might answer this question about implementation science, is that in the case of the Young Farmers Project that I'm working on in New South Wales, we're doing 4-month cycles. So what we're doing is we're implementing, we do a plan for a week, and then we do. So this cycle, we've decided that we're going to run some business ready workshops, and we're going to do a podcast, and we're going to do some other bits and pieces. We're going to upgrade the website and put some templates on it. So we said, right, in our plan, that's what we commit to do. We spent a week doing that plan. It's a 4-month cycle. We're then going to go away and implement that for 3 months. And then we come back and we bring an advisory group together to review the data. We collect data along the way and say, well, did we do what we said we'd do? How much of it did we do? And did any of it make a difference? And so we look at those questions. And then using that data, we then make a decision. So in answering that question around implementation, we give it 3 months in this scenario, give something a go for 3 months, and then we review it and say, well, do we need longer? Do we need to change anything? Do we need to stop it, or do we need to start something else? So that's the continuous improvement using that, plan, do. I mean, they've got check here, but it's plan, do, study, or check, or review, or whatever. And then act is making a decision for the next cycle. What are you going to do next? So there's a lot of information that we've just covered. Again, I'm hoping that it's key concepts that you'll go away and look at. But how do you see this idea of reflective questions and sprints in your current project and program? Can you work like this? Is there a possibility to sort of look at short cycles or even an annual cycle to make sure that there is space and opportunity for the now what part so that we can use our outcomes, measurement and evaluation findings? What are people's thoughts? There's a couple of questions there. People might be having a discussion. Does anyone want to put their hand up and I can take you off mute and you can share what you're thinking or saying or where you're at? Who's up for talking? This is when we find out who's got microphones or not. I'm going to take a couple off mute so we can have a bit of a discussion about this. Marianne, are you able to talk? Or Emily and team? Like to share some reflections? Or Andy? I'll take you off. No mic. Anybody else? Anybody else want to take themselves off mute? No mic. Should have asked you all to make sure you had mics and things so you could participate. Anybody else want to think? So? If you're on the phone, you should be able to talk.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Andrea?
Can you hear us now?
Is somebody talking other than me? Yes, we can hear someone. That's awesome. I can't hear anyone. Who's this? Who's talking? Anybody want to talk? You're all off. You're all off. Off mute. Andrea.
Hi, can you hear? It's Emily and Alyssa.
Emily, yay!
Hello.
Technology, isn't it a wonderful thing? Hello.
I know, we've been trying.
Oh dear. We will all get there. Okay, I apologise for that. Emily, share with us your thoughts in your group there about this idea of sort of making a time for reflection and now what, that sort of reflection planning. Well, what's some of your thoughts about this?
Yeah, we were just talking about, Alyssa just said, so much of this seems like common sense.
Absolutely.
And I kind of saying, well, yeah, but I think that's part of the problem, right? Because we do feel like it's common sense, but then we don't actually create the space and time to do the work, to do this work. It is part of building a culture of like a learning organisation, like you said, and a culture of evaluation, but literally scheduling the meetings and keeping them, like keeping them in the calendar and actually doing the work, I think is part of the challenge. But yeah, so that's what we were sort of talking, like it all seems like it all makes perfect sense, but then yeah, when do you actually do this? It's not that often that people do this.
So what's stopping us from doing this, do you think?
I think having the time, I think we get caught up in the delivery, and particularly I think because there's a focus on output still, there's still this fear of, I've got to run 12 group sessions because that's what I'm mandated to do, and you're not maybe specifically, maybe you don't prioritize the evaluation part.
Yeah, and that's what we're kind of thinking about with the culture of evaluation or outcomes thinking, that you're then prioritizing different things, you're able to prioritize different things. So you're able to create space for this as opposed to delivering those 15 groups and you don't know whether they've been done well or not.
And also just quickly building on that is I think the need to include staff in that evaluation process, because I think it's so easy for managers to think, oh, I'll take the reins here. And then as a result, staff don't actually know really what they're achieving, what they're working towards specifically.
Absolutely. And your staff are the ones who are the most important, because they're the ones that are implementing, and they're the ones who can make sense of the data. And if they're involved in creating the tools and collecting the data and then making decisions on the data, you know, they'll understand it because they've been all the way through the process, and it will be useful because, you know, they're the ones connected to the work on the ground.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that thing about it is shifting. I think we're going to see more of, you know, the government requesting these. They want outcomes measurement. Haven't quite got to evaluation.
Definitely.
Certainly seeing the shift, aren't we, to collecting. But I'm worried that if we just purely become focused on measuring outcomes without the so what, now what, we will begin to see it as a useless, you know, exercise that is taking us away from, you know, our work if we can't see the benefit in it. So yeah,
and like it would be a focus on accountability as opposed to learning.
Yeah. It is definitely a challenge.
Thank you.
I'm reading from Fiona, from Andrea here, that with family services reforms and a move towards more evidence-based programs, our organisations are quite receptive to evaluation. However, I suspect could get stuck in jumping straight from measuring to keep doing the same thing. And I think hopefully this slide deck gives you a couple of slides that you can pick up and perhaps share in your meetings and ask some of the questions that I've asked you guys about. Well, why would we do it, and why would it be useful, and what would stop us from doing it? And that thing about giving it a go, so getting people in a room to evaluate on data. I remember the first cycle meeting that we had, the data was so ordinary, but it didn't matter in a way, because it was all about the process of coming together and looking at the data and asking questions and saying, well, the data isn't telling us what we need to know, so the outcome was we had to change the surveys, you know. So, but it's the discipline and the ritual and of a continuous loop of coming back and sitting down. It's a bit like having family dinner on a Friday, you know, a Sunday evening or whatever. You know, what is your culture? What are your rituals around this? So I think, you know, who has these roles? Just looking at some of the other comments we've got here. Mary Ann, you know, this thing about working with researchers, an avalanche of data. I have a wonderful visual of this sort of, you know, people standing at the bottom of a mountain and it coming down the hill. And it just was not ideal for the team to engage. I am the first to admit that as an evaluator, I can be a terrible communicator, and researchers, I think, are even worse at communicating. And I think the more that we can work with communicators and start working with video or, you know, or infographics or dashboards to get information across in a way that is useful and interpretable is so important. So yeah, Mary's written a nice comment there about, you know, like the idea of keeping it focused on a specific area or challenge rather than the whole program. Absolutely. And if you just had one reflection on one element, one evaluation question or one outcome, I mean, that, and then get people to see the benefit. It's change management, right? And they get people to play, have a go, and if they see it's useful, they're more likely to do it again. Is anybody else able to talk who would like to talk? Emily, who's that? We've only got. Is a good learning for us, Emily, when we come to do our reflection on this, is having everyone mic'd up and ready to talk, because it's really lovely to hear people's experience with this. So the last question there is about what do we need to do to build a culture of evaluation. So any one-liners that you've got or thoughts that you all want to sort of say, right, what do I need to do to create a culture of evaluation that you can do in your role? Yeah, like that. Just start the ball rolling. I love it, Andrea. Just do something. Yeah. Make a comment. What else can you do to just get this culture happening? Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Marianne, about start small and deliver on the full cycle to show the way. So do the plan. What are we going to do in the next 4 months? Do the doing, collect data along the way. And the three things that we collected data on when we were doing the sprint, when we do the sprints in the Young Farmers Project is, what did we do? So that's your outputs. We ran this many workshops, did this many, podcasts, had this many coaching sessions. So number one, what did we do? Number two, how many did we reach? So again, output, so numbers of people attending courses or coaching sessions and number of sessions delivered. And did anything change was our third question. And that was outcome data. So that was looking at, well, did we improve the knowledge, business skills of our young farmers? Did we create greater connections between young farmers in terms of social capital? So when we report back, and it's a 2-page document that we present of summary of findings to the committee in February when we meet again, will be what we did, how far we reached, how much, the dosage, and then what difference do we make? And that, as I said, the first one was pretty shocking that we didn't have all the data, but at least it's got us into talking about it and then the process of reflection. I think I really like that idea, Christine, about just bringing it into a team meeting. I mean, what a way to set up a team meeting agenda. So what, now what? Tanya, encouraging dialogue and questions. And I should have said earlier, actually, one of the things about questions is the what and the how are really powerful. Like anyone who's done coaching and you've done motivational interviewing, I'm sure, with as part of casework, stay away from the whys. Whenever you start saying why or asking why, people will get defensive. So I think those really open, appreciative inquiry questions, what would it take? What would it look like if we were successful? Those sorts of things. Is that quantitative or qualitative, that question? What do you mean, Christine? What are you referring to? In terms of the data that we collected, it was mostly quant for outputs, and then we gave a presentation of qualitative in terms of outcome data. Outputs were quant, so numbers, and did anything change was a mix. So we had some survey responses on increased knowledge and skills and confidence in business thinking for the young farmers, and we also had a few open questions for those activities, and we had some qual, but not a lot. Again, that summary document that I showed you earlier, where you present key findings, you've got to really bring it up a high level so we don't end up with the avalanche that Marianne was referring to earlier. Your role as evaluators is to help lead and facilitate evaluation. So that means you've got to get away from avalanches of data, and you've got to start synthesizing it so it's manageable. and so people can make the sense and make those judgments and recommendations. Okay. Do you believe in using SurveyMonkey? I absolutely believe in surveys. My issue with SurveyMonkey is that the data is held in Canada, it's not held in Australia. And for privacy legislation, you must hold data here in Australia. So if you are collecting data that is can identify people, you're potentially in breach of the privacy legislation. So I would recommend that you use Excel forms, which is free. If you've got Microsoft Office 365, it's part of your Excel package, your online Excel. You can use Excel forms. There are other ones, such as I think it's RedCap is a not-for-profit one. Yeah, you just need to be very careful about identifiable data being collected in databases and held in other countries. So I hope that sort of answered those questions. So are there any other trends you see that are encouraging more participatory approaches in learning and reflection? You know, are you starting, are you seeing this at least? You said, you know, we've talked a lot about being focused on outputs, but are you seeing any sun breaking through the trees? You know, is there anything you're beginning to see that you think you can hang on to and, you know, ride on the coattails of? Excellent. Community of practice are a great regular reflection space. Any other sort of things that you're seeing? I mean, the mere fact government is talking about outcomes measurement is very, very exciting. But we've got to go that one step further into measure it and evaluate it. Okay, well, hopefully this webinar might be a bit of sunshine through the trees. Peer-to-peer supervision and learning from each other. Absolutely. Like even if you sort of started it as a group, I love that idea actually. You know, sort of, and invite people in. You know, sort of grow, be an organic process within your organisation. I think that's a great way to approach it. So I had a slide there for Q&A, and we've been doing a little bit of that as we've gone. But I think what you know, that hour goes so fast. We're up to sort of 1 o'clock. You know, we've covered a lot, and to be honest, we often do this in a 5-day sort of residential course, and we've tried to sort of give you some of the highlights in 3 hours over webinar. So it's been a real introductory, but I hope there's been enough depth, because most of you did have quite a good understanding of what outcomes were. But I really hope you've all gotten something through this. So we measured them, you know, working out how do you measure them, and then we moved us into all about how do you evaluate outcomes. And today's been very much about the, well, so what, and now what? What do we do with all of this? Which will really loop back around to, well, you know, selecting those indicators and targets in the first place. So making sure it's useful and appropriate. So that ends our 3-part series. I will put a plug in for our training. It's quite accessible in terms of cost. I recommend going and having a look at our training. And you know, there's a lot more, you know, out there. Better Evaluation, which I think I've given you that link. Better Evaluation website is an excellent resource out of RMIT, worth having a look. So Emily's going to send out a survey to get some feedback on the series. We will share the slides. We will share the presentations as well. They've been recorded. And so I really, really hope, it's so hard doing this over a webinar. I don't get the feedback that I normally get being in a room, but I really hope there's been some things in it. And if you can sort of take a couple of minutes now before you get right back into your laptop about what are the 2 or 3 things that you're going to do in the next couple of weeks. So you yourselves are doing the, well, now what do I do with all of that? And it's 1 o'clock. So thank you all. I think you've all got my email. I'll pop it in the chat as well, to stay in touch. I know Emily will continue to support the network, and has been very helpful. And thank you for organising this, Emily. It's been a pleasure. And I think that's the end of our session. Bye.